speaker of side Affirmative to come up and open their team's case.
The chances of a violent criminal reoffending is well over 50%, and we think this is something that needs to be thought about a lot in today's debate. 3 things for you today. Firstly, on setup, my first substantive will be on how our side reduces reoffending. The second point will be on how our side ensures more community and victim safety. Okay, firstly here on setup, what do we define violent crimes as? We think this looks like your severe crimes that literally require like a high security prison. So things like murder, things like rape, aggravated robberies, severe cases of like domestic violence, things like that. What do we think like this monitor bracelet thing sort of imposes? Well, we think this is probably going to look like a location beacon and a little bit like a Life 360 sort of scenario where it's like if you're in an area where you're not meant to be, you know, police or the people monitoring you are probably going to get like a notification or a call out saying that like you're in an area where like known associates are that you shouldn't be around, things like that. Okay. Second piece of setup here is some important context for both of my points, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this. So firstly, we think that reoffending for these violent criminals is very, very likely. Why do we think this? Is a few reasons. Firstly, we think if you commit a violent crime, you're going to be going into a high security prison. In these high security prisons, you're surrounded by other violent criminals. These violent criminals have been literally shoved into a box. They have had all sense of control, like connection to the outside world basically taken away from them. It means they lose their sense of control, right? In these prisons, when you put them all together, it means they're probably going to be struggling for power because they want to feel sense of control over their lives again. So it means that when you chuck all these violent people in together, they're going to have violent tendencies towards each other. We see a lot of violence occurring in prisons. What does this mean? It means that criminals in prisons become more desensitized and less empathetic because they're spending 30 years of their life in their sentence surrounded by violence and other violent criminals, so it becomes more normal to them. Secondly, often violent criminals have a very like damaged psyche, or they suffer from like psychological issues which can't be fixed, right? Like you can't fix a pedophile, you can't fix a psychopath because that is literally how they are wired and how they are made. And so we think that when they have these psychological issues that are very, very difficult to change, it means that they are more likely to go out and reoffend because that is literally like how their brain responds to like their emotions as like violence or committing crimes, because in their mind they rationalize that as like okay. Thirdly, retaliation, right? We think, as I've just proven, that because they often have like a psychological issue like stemmed at this, it means that they don't act rationally. And as I've just said, they often respond to their emotions like by committing acts of violence because that's the only like way they have to cope with things. That's the only way they know. And so we think it means that like out of retaliation, when you've just had like the justice system lock you up for 30 years and suddenly you're out in the world, you're probably going to be like, oh well, I'm free, I can go and commit a crime now. Like I hate the justice system, I'm going to rebel against you and go commit another crime because they just don't act rationally. Okay. First point here then on how our side reduces reoffending. Context here is the same as my setup. So firstly, mechanisms. If you're in like a area where you have like known associates, or you're like a pedophile that's going near a school, right? If you have like a monitor that's like showing the police, showing people like where your location is, it means that if they get like a notification saying like this person's in an area where they're not meant to be, they can go there and they can like intercept you and make sure that you're not like getting yourself into like a bad situation before like something actually happens. It means they can go there and like de-escalate or like make sure you're not like about to go and commit another crime before something happens, which we think is really, really important so that they don't have to deal with like the aftermath of you committing a violent crime because they didn't know where you were. Secondly, it disincentivizes criminals to actually like go and reoffend once they get out of prison, right? Because if you've got like constant monitoring on you and the police know like if you commit a crime and they've got your location, they're going to track you down. Like you are going to like end up getting caught and getting sent back to prison if you commit a crime again, right? So it means that it basically disincentivizes them to like go and commit a crime because they know if they do, they're going to end up in an even worse situation again. And I don't think these criminals like ideally want to be locked back up in prison for another 30 years. Thirdly, the model of prison itself just isn't rehabilitative and doesn't really help criminals. We think that prison is basically just a form of punishment. It's not like a form of rehabilitation or like a way that actually like helps criminals, right? And we think that like most countries just simply don't have the capacity to like pour resources into rehabilitating every violent criminal and getting them back to the way they are. And as I've proven, in some cases, it is literally impossible to like make this person, you know, not have those tendencies again. So we think that by like putting ankle monitors on where you could like just watch and monitor and make sure someone's not doing something that they shouldn't be is a much more reasonable and realistic way for a lot of countries and like a lot of places to do this, because it doesn't require massive amounts of human resources, and it just means that like these people are disincentivized. Okay. Take a POI briefly.
Do you believe, under this assumption, that all of the criminals who commit these violent offences are incurable of their so-called criminality?
I don't think all of them are incurable, but I think a fair proportion of them would be, or it's very, very difficult to try and like change them, because I think if you've got like a problem in your brain that's like causing you to like rape somebody, I think that's like a pretty severe issue and probably not something that's very easy to change. So what are the impacts of this point? Firstly, repeated violent crimes are just going to be reduced, right? Because as I've just proven, people are disincentivized and they're more likely to get intercepted. Secondly, you're just going to have like less innocent victims and less people being harmed by violent criminals, which is really, really important, right? I don't think we want people to like just be wandering down the street and then they like get robbed or get a gun held to their head or like get raped and something like that. Like that's just really, really bad. And under our side, we're going to be reducing this. And thirdly, just less violence in communities, right? When you've got like less violent criminals circulating in communities, I think they might have like the tendency to like, you know, for gang things to worsen, or for like other criminals to like be attracted to them and to like, you know, have this sort of like collective like crime happening. And we think that this will just be reduced when like these criminals aren't like going and committing more crimes. Okay, second point here on how our side improves the victim and community safely. So my context here is that, you know, it's very public knowledge when a like violent criminal gets released into the community, right? Like you can go on databases and see like who's in your community and like see what crime they've committed, right? And we think that people probably get quite scared when this happens because obviously they don't want to walk down the street and run into a murderer. We also think that victims probably get quite scared because if you've like been raped, you're probably going to have like a lot of deep trauma from that. And if you know that your rapist is being like released back into the community, I think you're going to be pretty terrified. And I also want to note here that we value the well-being of the victims and innocent people in communities way higher than anybody who has committed like a horrendous violent crime against people. So what are the mechanisms here? Firstly, more security in communities. When somebody who's committed a violent crime is being constantly monitored, it means that people are just going to like have that security in knowing that like police are going to be right there if something goes wrong, or that they are like being tracked and being watched, that they can't commit another crime, or they will get caught if they do. Secondly, security for the victims, right? We think it's really, really important that the victims like feel secure again, and knowing that like the person who's like abused them or is like murdered somebody that they love is like being monitored and like being watched. We think this is really, really good because it means like they can live their lives like feeling secure, like as the motion states, this is like lifelong security. So it means that for their whole entire lives, wherever they go, like they know that they can't be like tracked down by the person who used to be their domestic abuser. They know that they don't have to like live in fear of this person because they are being monitored. So what are the impacts of this? Firstly, people in communities just feel safer, right? Like they're just trying to live their daily lives and like just feel safe and have a normal life. And we think it's like really, really important that they don't feel like unsafe in their community. And so on our side, we achieve this. Secondly, the victims feel safe and they probably feel a sense of justice in knowing that this person is always going to like be restricted and not like going to be able to go out and commit a violent crime and do the same thing to somebody else. We think that's really, really good. That's why we believe this should all stand.
I think Speaker, what was a fine speech, and I've got that Speaker opening.
In Southland, that will be a feat, so it won't fall over.
No, the contract will be valid, so it would fall over.
As the negating team, we value the security of the general public. We value the security of these victims, and even more so than the affirmative team. In my speech, I'm going to go over a brief amount of rebuttal for the first affirmative team speech, and then move on to a little bit of setup before going on to our two main points about the safety and effectiveness of this, and how this is actually going to cause an increase in crime. So some rebuttal. The first affirmative speaker has told us that there's going to be kind of a perimeter set up on these tracking devices. If someone goes near a concerning area, then they will be, then the police will be called out. We don't see this working too well. For instance, if someone goes too near a gang, are you really going to send out what you can spare, like 1 or 2 police officers into the middle of a gang just because an old gang member has gone there? We don't see this working too well. However, what we do see with this tracking is that the GPS of these ex-criminals is constantly going to be monitored. We agree with AF's definition of violent offence. We feel like this is reasonable. And so what we see more happening with these electronic monitoring bracelets is that it's tracking where these criminals are at all times and goes to a police database. And it will also be alerting if the bracelet is taken off or broken. So moving on to our first main point about the safety of this. So a majority of offenders in the Western world, where we see this taking place because they have the funds to do this, the majority of offenders will be tied to gangs or criminal groups. This often means they are submissive to the gang because they need maybe the stability, the money, the family feel of the gang. This makes data leaks a main problem. Criminals are always looking to avoid the law, to find new ways of committing crimes. And especially nowadays with AI and better hacking, gangs are more likely to be able to get into these systems and find these databases of the GPS. And of course, there are numerous problems with this. Ex-convicts can be tracked. So even if these people are willing to get out of a gang lifestyle to try to rebuild their lives, to be an upstanding citizen, they're not free. They could be tracked down by their old gang. And the consequences of this is that these ex-gang members are liable to being murdered, to being forced back into the gang. Think about how horrible this is. You were forced into a gang from a young age because you had no other option. You've just managed to safely get out of it and be supported. And now you're going to be brutally murdered because of this horrible tracking system the government has attempted to bring in. No. And what we also see with this is gangs attempting to recruit more people. They may not want to cause these crimes themselves, for instance, a robbery because they've got the bracelets on, but they might want to get new people who haven't yet been into prison to come and help them with this. So what we see is an increase in gang membership and therefore an increase in crime because they can commit more crime, they can organise more crimes and have these members committing them. This is extremely likely to occur. Gangs have the intent to want to commit these crimes, to get these drugs, to do these robberies, to get rich, and they also have the capacity to do this with this new AI and the hackers and the money from drugs. So what we see overall is this actual lack of safety with these bracelets because of the potential for leaks. We've seen this in the past with the firearms databases in New Zealand has been leaked multiple times, and now more than ever there is concern that these databases can be hacked. So what we see in our second point then is this is not actually going to stop crime from being decreased. These bracelets physically don't stop crimes from occurring. If someone in the spur of the moment forgets their bracelet, it's actually not going to do anything to stop them. Very few crimes are planned. The only thing we might see being planned is a burglary. Many are spur of the moment. For instance, drugs, drinking, in terms of rape, maybe lust, an arisen opportunity, and these are not going to be stopped by a bracelet. I don't know if you guys have ever been wearing your sunglasses and then forgot that they were actually on you, but this can also happen with the bracelets. Just like you might be wearing your sunglasses around inside all day, you might be wearing your bracelet and doing a crime because this bracelet, which is you're so used to, it's such a part of your life, is there and you're not actually thinking about it. Therefore, the crimes that are spur of the moment are not actually going to be stopped by these bracelets. And as we've shown you in our previous mechanisms, the crimes crimes that actually are planned, such as robbery, are going to be committed by people who aren't wearing the bracelets. Therefore, these bracelets are completely ineffective at stopping crime and may cause an increase in crime because the gangs need to recruit more people. Yeah, I'll take your POI.
Don't you think that police technology, which is usually government funded, wouldn't be miles ahead of the hacking abilities of a few gang members?
I'm pretty sure that some countries have recently been subject to a lot of hacking and lost a lot of money in cryptocurrency or something, and a lot of this isn't actually as secure as it might be, and we've told you that there are recent advances in technology which are making hacking extremely likely, especially for a lot of high-profile gangs, for instance, in the USA. So what we see is perhaps a potential decline in burglaries if they're unable to get more members, but we see that this doesn't actually change the amount of repeated offences after someone gets out of prison. So people are going to find other ways to avoid the consequences of these bracelets, and we're not actually going to see crime decrease. So what do we have on the negating side of the house that is better than F? So F has a continuation of crime, ineffective bracelets. We have this money that would have been spent on expensive technology. This money can be put into improving rehabilitation programs. The first affirmative speaker didn't seem to think much of prisons. Well, we're going to change that. We're going to separate gang members, reduce their influence, increase the rehabilitation programs so that they're more effective, so these people can come back to their senses. If someone is still a raging psychopath, they're not going to be released into society because these rehabilitation programs are going to be personal. Their mentors are going to understand them as a person and know how they're going with their recovering. Therefore, people are going to better respond to this personal care rather than chucking a tracker on them that they're soon going to forget. F told us that there is heaps of violence in prisons, and that will also be changed by this input of money. So incurable people aren't going to be stopped by bracelets, especially as we told you, crime's a spur of the moment, but they will be reduced by this rehabilitation program which recognises this need for them to stay in prison. So what do we see? We agree with the affirmative that the main stakeholders of this debate are the safety of the general public, and also the ability of people to stop committing crimes. So we see that on our side of the house, the general public is safer. The rehabilitation is going to recognise who can realistically be let out of prison, and will keep the people in prison who need to stay in prison. Therefore, we'll have less people committing crimes. Unlike F side, where the criminals are going to be able to recruit more people and still commit crime. And for the general public and the victims, they can feel more secure knowing that there is less crime around, less ability to commit crime, and therefore, if you are, for instance, a rape victim with that deep trauma, you are more likely to feel secure on our side. That worked.
Good.
I thank the speaker for their fine speech. I now invite the second speaker from the affirmative bench to come up and continue their case.
It would be great if all of the government funding into reducing crime could go into rehabilitation. But the status quo, which is what negating is actually defending, literally does not have the funds or the capacity to start rehabilitating these psychopaths, these pedophiles, and these domestic abusers, okay? So all the material they gave on rehabilitation is completely irrelevant in their case. 3 things I'll do for you in my speech today. Firstly, on the material on crime decreasing, and secondly, on the material on safety, and thirdly, my split point on how we break the cycle. Okay, on crime decrease, what did we hear? We heard crime's a spur of the moment. These violent crimes don't just happen, they're not planned, they just sort of happen because you feel like beating someone up or because you feel like robbing someone with a gun. Okay, so a few things to respond to this. I think firstly, even if crime does still happen, we have the capacity to actually solve it more easily if it's a repeated offence. For example, if you see that there have been 5 banks robbed, you can now go and track this individual's locations for the last month. And
Point of
go,
information.
wow, that's really ironic that this person who has been violently attacking people happened to be at the same, like the event of all these crimes. So I think solving crime is just more increased on our side. Okay,
Point
but
of
then
information.
secondly, I do think that a lot of these crimes are planned. Like someone doesn't just happen to have a roofie in their pocket when they go to the club. They are doing this with intention, right? So like saying that, oh, you're just like accidentally raping someone, I think is a bit of a mischaracterization. It does happen with intention, and there is a level of planning that happens with it. Okay, we also heard that like planned crimes are going to happen or be done by someone without a bracelet or without this tracking device. This, I think, was on the material about gangs. I think, yeah, probably. And if that does happen, they're probably going to get caught, because I think these low-level gangs who are like, I don't know, ram raiding a dairy are probably more likely to get caught anyway. And I don't think it's really relevant because we're just talking about these violent offenders re-offending. Obviously, we're not saying we're just going to solve crime and it's just never going to happen again. We also heard that, like, again, money can go into rehab. I already responded to this. It's not going to happen. It's not like you guys just have more money under your side because you are literally defending the status quo where this doesn't happen. We also heard that, like, incurable criminals aren't going to be put off, right? And we heard it through a comparison of you forget your sunglasses. I think there is a much bigger, like, there's a huge difference between, like, blocking out some light and the literal threat of going to prison for 30 years, right? Especially once you've already experienced it. If you have been in prison and, like, experienced the genuine trauma of living every day just to try and survive instead of being a human, it's probably going to be like much closer to the front of your mind, and you're probably going to be considering it a lot more in every action that you take. Okay, so I think these incurable criminals, once again, even if they do reoffend, it's going to be a lot easier to like connect them to a crime as opposed to like having to find all like the evidence of like DNA. If you can literally say you were at the same place as this woman who was murdered, I think that's very strong evidence already. Okay, now going on to safety. We heard that like gangs are going to start getting new members because they're going to start hacking into a governmental system. I think the gangs that want these violent offenders probably aren't going to be the ones with like high enough technology or enough funding to get like a state-of-the-art hacker from like Russia or something to hack into a governmental database. This is a complete mischaracterization and is literally just not going to happen. If they do want access to these new members, they can already access them, right? We have like open databases all around the world where you can find these like violent offenders. So at best for them, it's going to be a symmetrical harm. Also, I think that youths are an easier like person to sort of recruit into crime regardless. So like again, this isn't really relevant. Okay, we also heard a lot of material on like AI is going to make it easier for gangs to like commit crimes. Again, I think largely this is going to be a symmetrical harm. Like you can still have access to AI under their side. Like I don't know how this is supposed to be a harm under our side. We heard that most like criminals are connected to a gang and you don't want to dispatch a police officer to like someone visiting a gang head. I think the characterization that every like police force around like the world has only 2 officers to spare is crazy and literally just not how it works. I think most police officers, like or most police forces, do just have the capacity to respond to crime, right? Like, and on our side, they are more aware of it. So if an abuser is going close or getting into the neighborhood of his ex-wife, who he beat up for the last 10 years, it is much easier for the police to respond in a timely fashion rather than them having to clean up a body after she's been murdered. But then same thing. Now I'll be going into my split, but first I'll take a POI.
You mentioned in your example that, say for instance, when bank robberies, that if people are just going near these places in the first place, that police can just easily recognise them. If this offence is so repeated, what makes you think there's even integrity in the police system to begin with?
Okay, this is not a debate about like how good our police systems are or how good the justice system is. But I think what we are saying is it's probably going to be a lot easier for them to say that this criminal has committed this crime rather than like having to go through the entire like month-long process of accessing everyone's CCTV camera, like needing to prove that this person was in this location, or potentially going like, hey, did you happen to see this guy in this place? Which I think is a waste of police resources when we have the literal capacity to accurately give you the location, right? Okay, I'm now going to go on to my split point on how we actually break the cycle. So I think a lot of victims of violent crimes do end up or can end up becoming the perpetrators themselves, right? And you see this through the fact that a lot of violent criminals today, or a lot of violent offenders, are literally past victims, right? They were sexually assaulted or abused, and this like isn't responded to properly. So how do we actually do this? Or how does it actually happen under the aside? Sorry. People experience mental and physical trauma when a violent crime is committed against them, or they witness this, right? And oftentimes this might not be dealt with like effectively, or they aren't like sent to see a psychologist, right? So how do they actually end up becoming violent? I think you literally become desensitized, like all the material we gave you on like how in a prison you're living every day just to survive. You literally are just becoming desensitized to violence. That looks like a soldier coming back from war and not feeling that much empathy, or feeling a lot like more or less sensitive to things like someone literally dying next to them, right? Like if it's normalized and if you witness it all the time, or you've witnessed it and you saw that you were fine and you've like lived and you'll live and be okay, I think people do just find like less of an emotional response to this. Okay, so why are they actually, how do we actually reduce this? I think Ella's points gave us the material that like reoffense is just less likely to happen, right? Like someone's probably going to start thinking twice before they start like, I don't know, repeating their poor behavior. So we are literally just reducing the tally of victims under our side. We don't see how these like rapists and these murderers are just going to stop because they've left prison under their side. What we see is they're going to think twice about it, so they just have more of an incentive to not commit these crimes in the first place because they're more likely to get caught. So like statistically, we have less of a chance of more offences, and so in the long term we will just see less cyclical or horrible offenders because there's less of the psychological trauma actually happening. So overall, I think you should weigh us on the severity of harm that actually happens under their side, and this, like the benefit and the potential harms under our side are greatly less than what the potential harms are on their side. For that, I think the motion should stand.
I thank the speaker for a fine speech. I now invite the sitting speaker from the negating bench to come up and continue their team's case.
Beginning my speech in 3, 2. For the offender of such violent crimes as has been portrayed by both sides of the House today, what is the better rehabilitative outcome? Is it better rather to have a system that is actually collaboratively responsive and, say, culturally and emotionally responsive to your individual circumstances, or rather is it better for you to be persistently tracked and monitored momentarily at each present moment of the day? What am I aiming to achieve in this speech? Firstly, I'm going to achieve some points of recontextualization, these specifically being on the likelihood of data leak, the use of contextualization of rehabilitation programs and their effectiveness, and thirdly, a point on criminal psychology and just the likelihood of certain individuals being permissed from the judicial system and the penitentiary systems imposed in both sides. Okay, so, and then thirdly, I would like to then begin on reiterating our first clash of data leaks, our second clash of counterfactual alternatives and opportunity cost, and a third clash as a response to their case of the potential for police brutality and for other offences to occur. Okay, material you will hear in response to occur. The first thing you occur is the unrealism of a data leak. Their response to Natalie's claim of a data leak, we already see this in New Zealand. We see a very comparable system. The New Zealand Firearms Safety Authority, the New Zealand Firearms Registry effectively now being a compulsory or a compulsory system for registration of individual firearms on the basis of a number of circumstantial details for each licensed firearms owner in, say, a legal context. New Zealand, a particularly developed country with a high level of technological infrastructure development in a modern era with technically trained and capable individuals able to respond to this, we still see leakage of data. And I think the first thing that they tell you of why this is not well here is gangs don't have the sophistication for this. We think broadly we see this in the Western world occurring on such a scale. So we don't define a gang. A gang doesn't specifically have to be a street gang, say in one context. It could look like a human trafficking ring in Central Europe. It could look like a discriminatory organisation in America. It could look like any individual organisation or any individual that is willing to subvert this miscarriage of justice. And when you have this interaction on a global scale, what we have presently, we have systems like the dark web that are full of promotion of malicious content and the sharing of criminal and detailed information that's already occurring through, say, the transfer of, say, police data lists. Rather, what we have in this case, they are correct in saying that data already exists. Now, what do you think is the extent to that data harm when you go from, say, a registry list where you get rough location, you get where an individual's residing, say, from Interpol, that's released. Now, under their side of the house, you get precise and detailed GPS estimate as to where an individual is at a given point in time, where they can and cannot go, thereby creating so many more harms for not only their potential rehabilitative ability, but their safety for border contact. And I'll take a POI before I go on. Yep.
All of your material is contingent on these violent criminals working in gangs. What about the instances of one-off rapers and like domestic abusers who definitely weren't exclusive?
Yeah, I understand. Okay. Predominantly in most systems throughout the world, you have these cases. Now, this goes on to our point of criminal psychology. Their system, basically, they tell you the penitentiary system and the judicial system works no different to drafting sheep, in my opinion, on the basis that they say, right, once your 10 years gone, right, you out, into the community. They fundamentally disregard the so what does this realistically look like when you're, say, being dismissed from prison? I'll give you 3 responses on this. The first response looks like there's an assessment of character and judgment, because in these Western countries, through the use of criminal psychologists, corrections officers, we look like this is actually extensively used. One, because there's funding, there's substantive academic literature on, say, the use of criminal psychology. It's not looking like, and even in the most severe cases, they talk about these really deranged individuals. You think of, say, characters you would see in Christopher Nolan's Batman, these really psychologically deranged characters with these, say, incurable. What makes you think really that these individuals, if they're so publicly dangerous, are going to be released? We think there are certain programs like life sentences, there is maximum security, there are facilities that entail for individuals who simply cannot be released for the threat of public safety. So we believe there are structures imposed that likely mean these individuals do not see, say, the break of being released, and because the extent of their crimes or their capability for reoffending is great. We see another response being like, say, something like good behaviour charges being released or omitted earlier based on, say, good behaviour, engagement and programs, so engagement with rehabilitation. We see so many structural mechanisms present in our system. So we go through, then this ties into rehabilitation programs present in prisons. They say it's not to, I give you a response. This might vary in countries. This isn't a debate really about whether rehabilitation programs are implemented. I think it is degrading to their case to say simply they don't exist. Throughout New Zealand, they are extensively listed. We have, say, at Waikeria Prison in Auckland, very large, extensive maximum security prison. They own a farm south of, I believe, somewhere in Morrinsville, a dairy farm, which gives individuals the ability to renovate their skills to attain NCA credits, to thereby learn capable skills and to thereby re-engage in employment, which is civil, which gives individuals a sense of purpose. And we tie this to criminal psychology. We tell you that it's not just individual derangement. Natalie gives you examples, and we think of the allegorical example in New Zealand society of that film, Once Were Warriors. We see in that film, that specific case of individuals being tied to gangs because they have an impoverished and already cycles of abuse, poverty. What do individuals look to? They look to these sound, especially for males in particular, but not always the case, these governance, these hierarchical structures that give individuals a sense of purpose, and they're so inherently tied. To say that these individuals, then it's degraded, it's just something that's part of them, I think is just so degrading to this individual and their actual ability to safely interact with society and the burden they create. I think this is a very simplistic analysis and does not tailor to each individual. I'll take one more POI before I go on.
Even after rehabilitation, don't you think that victims and people in general will still feel incredibly unsafe knowing that there is an ex-violent criminal?
Why do you think we have victim support programs in place? Why do you think there are so many structural... This debate isn't regarding victim support. There's, or, for instance, why do you think prisoners are geographically allocated based on the area in which they commit a crime? This isn't a debate so much regarding these principles, but rather how they're implemented. I just think the omission of these, there obviously are these structures present in these Western, these instituted systems that mitigate the harms of this. So, okay, how are harms exclusive to their model proposed that are not exclusive? And this is the main clash of this debate you'll see, is with data leaks. What is their likelihood? So the likelihood now with data leaks, they tell you that, we tell you for some reasons, one, there's criminal mentality, there's incentive. Criminals always have this incentive. On a global scale, this is mitigated, and because one data leak, we tell you it's interconnected. If criminals from a whole country, if one list is produced of criminals, that's not individually exclusive to say the list information of one criminal is being released, but if one list is released, all information is released, and these organisations, it's permissive, sold on the dark web, it's transmitted, we have a very viral scope and context of information being released. I think this is very imminent, and we've seen we have the New Zealand Firearms Registry being leaked on multiple accounts, and now this is extenuated by it being a real-life instance of geographical exposure, meaning what do you get with this? We get the existing circumstances, say, of criminals being inherently retaliatory. Gangs, for instance, say a gang member has lost drugs for the gang. They have lost finances for the gang. They've betrayed the gang. A rival gang is out to get them. There's so many circumstances of which these individuals, or even in the case of domestic abuse, the family of, say, the abuser wants to go out and get them. There's always someone in these criminals, because humans are inherently vengeful. We have this mentality, eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. We have this likelihood to be inherently vengeful when there's so much emotional stake in these cases. So people are intentionally likely to reoffend. What do you get? You get this high likelihood of violence occurring, and then we also see, what do we see with this? The likelihood of brutality. If these systems don't work, okay, and this is why I rest my case that we prove today.
I thank the speaker for what was a fine speech, and I invite the third speaker of the Affirmative to come up and continue their team's case.
Saying that this debate does not regard victims is an absolutely wild statement to make when it is literally about crimes that massively and violently impact tons of people. 2 points of clash in this debate. First of all, what is the effectivity of alternative punishment and rehabilitation, and what is the impact on the individual? And second of all is how effective is the system in reducing crime? Alright, on to my first point of clash around the impact on the individual and alternative punishment. We hear a lot from the first speaker about how we will increase the effect of rehabilitative punishment within prisons, that because we have all of this money, because we're not spending it on ankle monitors, we will all of a sudden have these really great prison systems. I have two main responses to this. First of all is one actually Yanai said about the status quo, is that we see under the status quo that we do not have these rehabilitative systems within prison. We have given you tons of reasons about why prisons are actually worse and not rehabilitative. We don't understand where the tipping point is. We don't understand what would actually change under your side to allow this to happen. Second of all, rehabilitation is hard. You cannot just throw money at it. We have said why this doesn't happen. We will say that there is a lot of time that is needed to change these massive systems, these systems that have been incorporated into the legality and the politics of a country over years and decades and centuries. We think that this will take a very long time to achieve versus more immediate results seen on our side of the house. We think that if you are trying to claim rehabilitative punishment being integrated into prisons, this will first of all cost a lot of money, and second of all, it will take a very long time to actually see any results due to the scale of the issue. Second of all, we hear from both speakers that psychopaths will not just be released into the society. First of all, we disagree with this. I would like to bring in an example of a man who committed murder. He was sent to prison, but he was discovered to have some
some mental illnesses, and therefore he was put into a psych ward and then released shortly thereafter when he shouldn't have been. He then went back into society, and against his will, due to his mental illness, he committed another crime. We think that we actually see this a lot because of the issues prevalent in this system, because there are not enough checks and balances to ensure that people who have mental illnesses are not properly addressed. This means that even though people might not want to actually commit these crimes, they do. We are helping them under our side of the house by actually monitoring where they are and what they are up to. Second of all, we think that most committers of violent crimes are psychopaths. We don't think that you can be a person in your right mind who can go, oh yeah, let's just go out and murder 5 people today. Let's just go shoot up the park. We think that if we are releasing people who have committed violent crimes, these people do have mental illnesses, they do have other issues. My first 2 speakers have already explained this. And third of all, we think that people can actually go to prison for something that isn't too bad. And like my first speakers have explained, they can get out and do worse things because of the behavior that they learned within the prison. This is something that has been explained by my first 2 speakers. Yes, I'll take a POI.
As we have clearly reiterated to you throughout this debate, do you not believe in a highly manipulative and vindictive gang system that there is not just consistent pressure on someone to commit violent acts regardless of how they feel about leaving the gang?
We think that this does exist, but we don't see how this gets any better under your side of the house. We don't understand how this person won't just leave prison and then go again and just recommit. However, on our side of the house, they do have an incentive. They do have an ankle monitor. It's a tangible, permanent reminder not to do that. And it does mean that police can help them seek witness or victim support programs if they are seeing that these gang members are in close proximity to each other. Because if you are a gang member who is trying to leave a gang and do you want to go to the police? Do you think that you will feel safe to go to the police and say, hey, I'm being harassed by these gang members, all right? They're not going to feel safe to do so. Whereas if the police can actually see that this is happening, they can then intervene and in a more conspicuous way. Okay, into my second point of clash about the effectivity of this system in reducing crime. We hear a lot about how gangs can just hack systems, see where each other are, and track each other down. I have 4 responses to this. First of all, we think that gangs can actually track each other down without hacking. We think this is something that has existed for a very, very long time. We think that these very big gangs and organizations have connections, they have knowledge, they have all the street cred. They can probably go and track down these people anyway, so this will happen on both sides of the house. Furthermore, like my previous speakers have said, we think that police systems are secure because they have an incentive to be, because these are governmental systems. They have an incentive to be there for the public. They cannot, this is very important information, they will not just be created by a toddler typing up, on Scratch how to code like a major system, right? They will have experts, they will have financial access, they will have all of these resources that make it hard to hack. We also hear, again, like my first speakers have said, that many gangs, many gangs are often impoverished and undereducated, which is why people join gangs, because they feel excluded from society and need a community to join. We think that these people are not likely to have access to hacking skills or people who can hack. Furthermore, we think that gang members, if we do believe that they can hack, that they will hack other areas of police security. We believe that if these people can hack a system where you can see where all other released prisoners are, that they can actually access other things, such as locations of people under witness protection. If you were a gang member sent to prison, who do you think you were more likely to go after? Maybe your old buddy Carl, who you used to go have beers with, or the people who sent you to prison for 30 years. We think that if we do believe that these members are vindictive and have the ability to go hack, they are not likely to always go after the people who used to be in the gangs. They are more likely to go after more important things that they believe that they want to affect. We have told you lots of reasons why violent criminals reoffend. We have told you prison is punitive. We have told you that prison is a harsh environment where prisoners will learn more bad behavior. We have told you that violent offenders have mental issues that make it hard to work through, even in rehabilitative systems. Even if we do manage to embed these into punitive punishments such as prison, we don't think that this will always have the effect that we want. And we've also told you that these prisoners who have left are angry at people who have sent you to prison. There was recently a jailbreak in New Orleans where 10 prisoners, high security prisoners, who had committed domestic abuse and assault, who had committed murders, just recently, broke out of the toilet in the prison, and many people were worried. The victims of the families in the area had to evacuate their homes because they were worried these people are coming for them. We also think that if you don't reoffend, this doesn't impact you any more than a literal violent criminal record. And that brings me into another point. If we're talking about being dehumanized, if we're talking about the rights of the criminal, we think that having a literal criminal record that follows you around is so much more dehumanizing and so much more drastic than having a little chain on your ankle. Alright, and so just to wrap up this debate, I would like to point out the burdens of each team. We think that in this debate, the negative team has the burden of proving just beyond a shadow of a doubt that without criminal ankle monitors, the community is still safe, because we value them highly in this debate, because these are our vulnerable people, these are our innocent people. We think that in order to win, Negating has to prove that they will not be harmful and that reoffence won't happen, and if they are unable to prove this, they have to prove that the rights of the prisoner are more important than the rights of the victim. Meanwhile, how we will win this debate is we've proved why reoffending happens in status quo. We have proved that we have less of this because of the continuous deterrence, because of the tangible ankle monitor rather than just the threat of the prison. Threat of prison. We think that this means there is less severity, there is less scale of people actually harmed, and less vulnerable people being harmed. We think at the very least we can prove that if this does not happen, it is easier to monitor, stop, and prevent reoffending, and we think we can claim the long-term benefits of this. And at the very, very least, the community feels safe, and the scale of people who have been helped will be happy. If we can just claim the benefit of communities feeling happy and feel safe, this is enough to win this debate, and this is why the movement must stand.
I thank the speaker for a fine speech. I now invite the third speaker of the negating bench to come up and wrap up this and call the negating's case.
Right. Beginning my speech in 3, 2, 1. Right, quite simply, the opposing team that must not really care about public safety, because if they really did, they'll be on our side of the house. Right. Our path to victory is we win this debate if we prove that ankle monitors are ineffective in preventing violent crime and preventing reoffending. And in fact, we've proven that so that we can worsen reoffending. However, the other thing that we need to prove in order to win is that alternatives exist that are more effective already in reducing reoffending rates and therefore improving public safety. And we've again stated this through rehabilitation programs. Right. We have achieved this through our more personalised, responsive, less invasive approach, which we have identified as rehabilitation while in prison, as well as probation officers while out of prison. Now, we find that this approach offers a personal approach to future crime prevention, other than this big brother harmful big ankle bracelet thing that they've proposed. We find that this creates less underoffending, as the criminal is more likely to feel reintegrated into society as opposed to watched by society, watched by the police, not feeling very good. And we find that this also relates to counselling services, another personal, intellectual ways that this individual can seek help and to change. This is part of the support network which they need in order to distance themselves from, again, the gang example. Right? We have proven that these are more effective methods of preventing violent crime because they deal with the individual directly. Okay, and then they give them the communal support and the sense of societal value. Right. Number 2, in order to win this debate, well, we have achieved we minimise the harm of a data leak, which is exclusive to their side of the house with their 24/7 tracking. Right. So what they've proposed is that. Yeah, sure.
Why is this exclusive on our side of the house if we do believe that gang members can hack? Why would they not hack pre-existing police systems that have information such as witness protection programs and then go after them? Why can't that happen?
But you
on our
don't
side of
believe
the
the gang
house?
members will hack. That's been your entire part of this debate. You've been saying they can't afford a hacker, and now you're saying that they can. You're just backing up our points here. Right, and actually moving on to our points of gang members can afford hackers. Now, let's talk about the realism of their side of the debate. They have said quite repeatedly that criminals cannot afford hackers. Now, as we've seen, this is blatantly wrong. We're just not talking about the mongrel mob here growing a few plants of weed in Matilda. We're talking about cartels. We're talking about human traffickers. We're talking about organisations with massive amounts of power, massive amounts of money, great incentive to harm anybody who harms them or changes or threatens their supply of money, which gives them their power. They have great incentive and great capacity to afford these hackers, to encourage the data leak. And we find that this is just bad. And to assume that they cannot afford one is quite simply ignorant and wrong. Right. And also, they've also stated that governments cannot be hacked. Now, in the realism of this, the government's only incentive, really, when we boil it down, it's okay, take it down to its core, the government's only incentive is to get re-elected. Okay? Now, a major part of this is to save money. No, thank you. Is to save money, okay? That's what you want to do to get re-elected. Save money, spend it on things that people want you to spend money on. Now, we find that this narrative of the government purely wanting to get re-elected is much more realistic than their valiant but ignorant public good narrative. No, thank you. We now find that this promotes government services that can indeed be hacked, that they do not have this incentive to spend this extra money to get this extra data leak prevention because they don't know that incentive. Their incentive is to get re-elected, and this is not associated with data leaks. Okay.
Isn't one of the ways that the government gets re-elected is by ensuring the country's security? Why would they want to give that up or let themselves be hacked?
Well, there are other ways that they can put the money towards. What I'm saying basically is that they'd rather spend the money on something else that's more visible, that the government can point to and say, yes, we did that, instead of spending on money on something to prevent a data leak, which is not quite as visible. Rather than go for the maximum impact, go for something big, flashy, lots of money, typical government bureaucracy. Right. And right. We've also achieved this through. The funding that's taken from the already overstretched prison system hinders our proven to be effective alternatives. Right. Let's also just touch back on the realism. This relates to the realism. We haven't heard much material from the opposing team as to how we're going to expand these ankle monitor programs. At the moment, they're for probation. No, thank you. At the moment, they're there for probate, people on probation. And this is a rather small amount of society. Now, they have not said how we're going to afford to give everybody that has ever committed a violent crime out of prison an ankle monitor for the rest of their life. And this is taken into account all the different factors, such as the degradation of the ankle monitor, the condition that it's in. It needs to be working, how they're going to check that. We just have not heard any material as to how we're going to enforce these ankle monitors to be placed on these individuals and how this is going to be sustainable, how we are going to buy one for every person that's ever committed a violent crime. Yeah, okay.
If you were a rape victim, how would you feel if your rapist got released back into this community? There's nothing to hold them accountable because they went and got raped.
Well, well, and again, this relates back to our other point. They would not be in that same community. There would be already other procedures in place that we've talked about, such as geographical isolation. They would prevent them from being reintegrated back into the community that they came from. Existing things such as restraining orders, they would also play a part in preventing this rapist from associating further with the rape victim. Now that we have proven that this other debate, it's not real, they haven't really addressed much to the realism, particularly surrounding the maintenance and the upkeep of these ankle monitors. And they've also, cannot be hacked. Yes, it can. They can't afford hackers. Yes, they can afford hackers. Yeah, okay, sure.
A lot of your content again is contingent on people being reabsorbed in gangs. If you're saying that people won't be placed in geographical areas where they're going to be a threat, but at the same time they're going to be reabsorbed in gangs, why would they then put them in an area where there's gangs for them to be reabsorbed into?
Well, they're absorbed into the local chapter of their gangs. And if they're geographically isolated from that local chapter, then they won't be able to reintegrate with that local chapter if they're just not there. They won't know anybody on the other end of the country. Anyway, right, moving on from that. And really, okay, our case rests on the fundamental principles, really, of forgiveness. Quite frankly, not just forgiveness, also accountability. We can't rely on these people to not offend. But basically, imagine, just for a moment, that you are someone who's made a mistake. You've been in a gang, maybe. Maybe you joined a gang because of desperation. Again, the ones from Warriors example, gang out of desperation, okay? We have proven this is something that's likely to happen. But imagine you're desperate, you're a teenager. You did something dumb because of the mentality that the gang promotes of blatant obedience, fascism almost. And you've done something stupid, and you've ended up in, you've done something, maybe you've barreled a house, because of the gang pressure. Now, you've come out of prison, yep, that's all good, and you've had an ankle monitor placed on you, and the data's been leaked, and the gang have found you, and because you don't want to be part of that gang anymore, you want to be in society, you want to reintegrate. Because of that, they have cut you off, and they're going to kill you. And frankly, we find that outside the house is better for all the stakeholders of both general public safety and this member of the gang. Proud to stand.
I thank the speaker for what was a fine speech. Now, as is customary, we will move into the leader's replies. Speech times are cut in half. The speaking orders are reversed. My claps, I will have 1 clap at 3 minutes, 2 claps at 4 minutes. There are no sore eyes during these speeches. So, without further ado, I will invite the leader of side negating to come up and close their team's debate.
I believe it's extremely unfair of the affirmative team to tell us that in order to win, we need to prove that there'll be no re-offence on our side of the house, since there's going to be more re-offending on their side of the house. So I think that realistically, in order for us to win, we have to prove that there is less re-offending on our side of the house compared to the status quo, and more re-offending on the affirmative team side of the house, rather than this airy-fairy utopia they're trying to get us to prove. So I'm going to look at a few key points of this debate and prove how we've won them, and therefore look at what the outcomes for our stakeholders, the community, and these victims and perpetrators of crimes are. So one thing we've seen come up a lot in this debate is the affirmative team has told us that it's going to be far easier to solve crimes. Yep, it's going to be easier to solve crimes, but which would you rather have? Crimes being prevented or crimes being solved? Because realistically, tracking bracelets could help you prevent a murder from happening, but if you're a dead person, you'd probably much rather have been alive rather than being like, oh yeah, they caught the person who killed me, sweet, that's good. So we've shown you on our side of the house how there's actually going to be more criminal activity, more people getting absorbed into gangs, more people, and that a lot of these crimes are committed from instinct or a rush of decision, or maybe when you're drunk, and therefore the bracelets don't stop this, and actually the re-offending will continue. And yet you might solve the crimes, but you're not going to stop them. And as our stakeholders are the community, what we need is for these crimes to stop, not to be solved more easily. And we've been told quite a lot about data leaks and AI from both sides of the house. And yes, on both sides of the house, the criminal gangs might have the ability to hack data. But what we see on the affirmative team side of the house is that they're able to hack far more information than they would on our side of the house. So on both sides, the gangs, if they leak, might be able to go after their witnesses. On the affirmative team side of the house, they would also be able to go after the people who have left the gangs. And so therefore we see more murder, more harm on the affirmative team side of the house. And we've won that point. And then one more thing that's come up briefly from both sides is the money for both of these initiatives. If the current government neither has well, they've told us the current government doesn't have money for these rehabilitation programs. Well, then how do they have money for bracelets? We've told you this. Both sides need money. That's kind of an irrelevant issue to this debate, especially because it was brought up so much. Therefore, I don't think that really should come into this at all. So finally, looking at the effectiveness in stopping crime, which we believe is the most important part of this debate, because realistically it's more important for crime to be stopped than crime to be solved. We've told you how even with these bracelets, these gangs are going to get other people to do crime who don't have the bracelets, or that a lot of these things are spur of the moment and will not be stopped by bracelets, which you might forget. Realistically, your sunglasses are quite important because you can't see properly with them on, but you still forget it. And these bracelets will be forgotten, especially if criminals are used to wearing them. And finally, we've told you that a lot of places are unable to send officers to when they're near a perimeter, especially because we've told you that ex-gang members are sent away from their gangs. I don't know about you guys who live in the big smoke, but in Invercargill, if they sent a few, quite a lot of people wearing these tags, and every time they went near, I don't know, a school or something, the police were called out. Our police force would not manage to cope with that. So therefore, at the end of my speech, what have we proved, us the Negating team? We've proved it's safer for the general public because there's going to be far less crime committed on our side of the house because they'll have these personalised rehabilitation programs which get them to stop committing crimes. Therefore, there is more, life is better for the victims because they know this crime will not be committed, as opposed to the Affirmative team who thinks that more crime is the answer.
I think speaks for a fine speech. I now invite the leader of the Affirmative side to come up and close today's debate.
Wanting to live in a world where we just simply forgive someone for raping 5 people is complete ludicrousy and is all that side negating is standing for. 3 things in my leader's reply. Firstly, on which side is more capable at preventing reoffence. Secondly, on where are victims actually going to be safer. And then very minorly, thirdly, on where are criminals going to be better off. Okay, what did we give you on preventing reoffence? We actually just gave you a lot of material on why criminals are likely to reoffend in the first place. There was no real response on their side as to why this isn't true. So we proved that, firstly, someone who literally is incurable and incapable of getting rehabilitation is probably going to go on and to reoffend at some stage after being in prison, right? The only real solution to preventing reoffence is having a completely rehabilitative system. Secondly, we actually gave you material on the fact that how we prevent this is things like police response, right? We discussed things like a boundary, a paedophile not being permitted to be near a school. This is going to be notified. You can get a response from this. I think it still stands for us at the end of the debate. But then secondly, on police response, if an offence does occur, it's probably going to be a lot easier for them to respond to it in terms of response time. If you're aware that there is a bank being robbed and then you see that someone who has murdered 5 people is in that same location, there's going to be more desperation in terms of response. But then secondly, we also gave you material on the actual disincentives that happens under our side, right? The fact that you are constantly aware of having this ankle monitor, because we talked about how genuinely traumatic it is for you to have been in prison. You probably don't want to go back, and you do just have that physical reminder all the time. So the personal awareness of this is going to be increased. The only responses we got to this was around gang recruitment, and I think that the reason this doesn't really stand so much or to such an extreme way that they're trying to prove is the fact that we focused on individuals as well. They gave us no real material as to why like individuals are so badly off under our side. For example, that one rapist who had no gang affiliations in the first place. They also said like gang recruitment is going to like just happen to a larger extent. I think we proved that this is going to be symmetrical regardless. And they also, like, most of their material is the fact that like crimes are committed on a whim, therefore there's like a lack of incentive or like disincentive to commit crimes are just not going to happen. We have proven that it is planned to a degree and people will just again be more conscious of it. So I think on that point we win by a landslide. Okay, secondly, on where are victims actually going to be better off? What did we actually say? On the emotional scale, we make them feel safer. They feel like there is less of a threat of their abusive ex-husband pulling up and like coming to threaten them, right? We have talked about how communities feel safer. They feel like the police are there to help them and to take care of them. But then we have like a constant awareness that you're physically being tracked. Secondly, we've got lifelong monitoring, so people like feel less incentive again. What else now on to where are criminals going to be better off? They gave us a lot of information, again, on this recruitment and how you're going to be victimized and like geographical location of these things. I don't think that this is really relevant because once again, we said that it's going to be symmetrical. Okay, now onto how we actually win. We win on scale of harm. Of course, it's going to be upsetting for someone who like doesn't think they're going to reoffend to be tracked, but I think it's a lot more upsetting for like a murderer who has been accused in the past of murdering people, being released from prison, and then continuing on their murdering spree, right? Like the actual scale of harm on their side is just a lot greater than what we will ever have under our side. And we also get the long-term benefits, which there wasn't any interaction with whatsoever. So for these reasons, I think we won the debate.
Perfect. I think everyone thought it was a great debate. We're now going to stop the live stream. I invite both teams to cross the floor, shake hands, congratulate yourselves on a great debate, and then head outside so that the judge can make their decision.
Good job. Good job.
Right.
Sorry,